Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are not just looking at biography. We're looking at a seismic shift.
Mm-hmm.
We're tackling a figure who, quite literally, redrew the map of the Middle East and redefined what it meant to be Arab in the 20th century.
Absolutely. Gamal Abdel Nasser.
Gamal Abdel Nasser. And to really give you a sense of the scale we're dealing with here, I mean, the sheer magnitude of this man's presence, we have to start at the end.
You have to. The funeral.
The funeral, September 1970. We're looking at the source material here, and the numbers are just, they're hard to even comprehend. 5 to 6 million people in the streets of Cairo.
It's staggering. Just try to visualize that. 5 million people. That is a human tide.
It's a whole country.
It's bigger than many entire nations at the time. It wasn't just a ceremony. It was an event that, effectively shut down the entire Arab world. The footage is unbelievable.
You see heads of state, grown men just weeping openly in the streets.
It was this moment of collective grief that you so rarely see in history.
And that really brings us to the mission of today's deep dive. We have a huge stack of sources here, biographies, political analyses, historical records, and our goal is to unpack the central paradox of this man.
Yeah.
Because on paper, it really doesn't make sense.
It really doesn't. That is the puzzle we have to solve today. How do you reconcile the Lion of the Arabs, this hero who restored dignity to a region colonized for decades, with the autocrat who built a terrifying police state?
Right. And how do you balance the transformative social reforms he pushed through with the fact that he led his country into some of the most crushing military defeats in modern history?
It's the ultimate contradiction.
He's the postman's son who became a colossus. He's the dictator who is genuinely, truly loved by the masses.
So we're going to get into all of it. The secret societies, the assassination attempts where he doesn't even flinch.
The high-stakes Cold War poker, and, of course, the tragedy of 1967.
Yeah.
But let's rewind the tape. Let's go all the way back to the beginning.
Before the myth.
Exactly. Who was Gamal Abdel Nasser before the posters and the statues?
To understand Nasser the president, you have to understand Nasser the boy. He was born in January 1918 in Alexandria. And the most critical piece of context here is his class background.
His father was a postal worker?
Right. Abdel Nasser Hussein, a postal worker.
Which, in the grand scheme of things, sounds like a solid, regular job.
It was, but you have to see it through the lens of Egypt in the early 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
This was a deeply, deeply stratified society. At the very top, you had the king and the pasha class, the wealthy land-owning aristocracy who were very cozy with the British occupiers.
Okay.
And at the very bottom, you had the fellahin, the peasantry, living in just crushing poverty. Nasser was in the middle.
The Effendi class.
The Effendi class.
Yeah.
So he wasn't destitute, but he was certainly not part of the elite. He was, in every sense, a man of the people.
And the sources, they paint a picture of a pretty lonely, transient childhood.
Extremely transient, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because of his father's job, the family was constantly on the move. They went from Alexandria to Asyut, then to Katapa, then to Cairo.
Always the new kid.
Always the new kid, always the outsider looking in, constantly having to adjust. But there is a specific tragedy in his early life that I think really shaped his psychology more than anything else.
The death of his mother.
Yes.
Yeah.
When he was still quite young, he was sent away to school in Cairo to live with an uncle. He was very close to his mother, Fahima.
They wrote letters constantly.
Constantly. And then all of a sudden, the letters just stopped.
That's a nightmare scenario for a kid. You're away from home, and the one person you rely on just goes silent.
And the way he found out is just heartbreaking. He didn't know the truth until he went back home to Katapa for a school break.
So weeks later.
Weeks later, he walks into the house expecting to see her and finds out she had died after giving birth to his third brother. The family had hidden the news from him.
Why?
To protect his studies.
Ah.
That was the reason they gave.
Wow. That kind of betrayal, even if it was well-intentioned, that has to leave a scar.
A deep one. Nasser later wrote that losing her that way was a shock that time failed to remedy. It created a wound that just never really healed.
And his father remarried quickly, too.
Before the year was out. So you can imagine it probably built this hardened shell of independence around him. He learned very early to keep his own counsel, to rely only on himself.
But even in the middle of all that grief, there were signs of the political destiny in the family's DNA. I saw a note that his brother had a very specific name.
Is all Arab.
Which translates to?
Glory of the Arabs. So even in this postal worker's household, this nationalist sentiment, this idea that Arab identity was something to be proud of and, fought for, it was already in the air.
So you've got this grieving, independent, transient kid growing up in a country that's technically independent but is really being run by the British. When does that revolutionary switch actually flip for him? When does he stop being just the student and start becoming an activist?
It happens remarkably early, and it happens in the streets. There's this famous anecdote from the 1930s when he was a secondary student in Alexandria. He's walking through Manchia Square, and he just stumbles upon a clash. Police with batons swinging, protesters shouting, total chaos.
And most teenagers would probably run the other way.
Exactly. But Nasser runs toward it. And the fascinating thing is, he didn't even know what they were protesting about.
Seriously.
He just saw the conflict, the authority figures beating people, and he instinctively jumped in on the side of the protesters. He actually got arrested and spent a night in detention.
Shoot first, ask questions later.
Precisely. It was only the next morning that he found out the protest was organized by the Young Egypt Society, and they were calling for the end of colonialism. But that moment, it solidified his path. He was a rebel looking for a cause, and he found it in nationalism.
He wasn't just a street fighter, though. He was a reader.
A massive reader. And you just have to look at his reading list. Napoleon, Otto von Bismarck, Garibaldi, Ataturk.
All nation builder.
He was studying men who built nations out of chaos. He was studying the playbook of the strong man. But there is one book, a novel actually, that is arguably more important than all the history books combined.
Return of the Spirit by Tawfiq al-Hakim.
That's the one.
This book comes up so much in the research. It's almost like a script for his life, isn't it?
It is eerie. The novel describes the Egyptian people as disjointed and chaotic, just waiting for a savior to unite them.
A man in whom all their feelings and desires will be represented.
Yes, a symbol. And Nasser didn't just read this, he internalized it. He later claimed this book inspired the 1952 revolution. He was, in effect, reading the job description for the role he would eventually play.
So he has the inspiration. Now he needs the tools. And in Egypt in the 1930s, if you want to change things, you don't run for office.
No, you join the army.
Right.
The army was the only real path for a young man from his class to gain any kind of power. But the door was initially slammed in his face. He applied to the Royal Military Academy in 1937 and was rejected. Remember that police record from the protest? It came back to haunt him. They didn't want troublemakers. They wanted a loyalist to the king.
So how did he eventually get in?
He needed Wasta influence. He enrolled in law school for a semester, hated it, and managed to get a meeting with the Undersecretary of War. He charmed him and convinced him to sponsor a second application.
And he got in.
He got in. And this is the pivot point of history, because the academy is where he meets the cast of characters for the next 30 years. He meets Anwar Sadat. He meets Abdel Hakim Amr.
And we are going to talk a lot more about Amr later.
We are. That relationship is central to the whole tragedy. But at the academy, they're just young officers watching their country be humiliated.
And the breaking point, the moment the anger becomes a plan, was in 1942.
The Abdeen Palace incident.
Set the scene for us. This is the middle of World War II.
Right. The British are nervous about Rommel's forces in North Africa. They don't trust King Farouk. They think he's too cozy with the Axis powers. So, to ensure a pro-British government, they decide to force the issue. They literally surround King Farouk's palace with tanks.
Wow.
The British ambassador marches in and gives the king an ultimatum. Appoint the prime minister we want or abdicate.
Gunboat diplomacy, but with tanks on the front lawn.
Exactly. And the king, the supposed sovereign of Egypt, he folded. He did what he was told.
And Nasser is watching this happen.
He's an officer in the army at the time.
Yeah.
And he's watching. He wrote later that he felt ashamed that the army hadn't reacted. He wished for calamity to overtake the British.
So that solidifies it for him.
It solidifies a core belief. The monarchy is weak, sovereignty is a joke as long as the British are pulling the strings, and the only force capable of restoring dignity is the military.
But before he could act on any of that, he had to go to a real war. 1948, the Arab-Israeli War. This seems like the moment he goes from being a revolutionary in the canteen to a battle-hardened soldier.
It was his baptism by fire. He was sent to Palestine, and he fought in what became known as the Fallujah Pocket.
His unit was surrounded.
Completely surrounded by Israeli forces, cut off from supply lines under heavy bombardment, but they refused to surrender. Nasser was actually wounded. A bullet grazed his chest. He became the hero of Fallujah for holding out.
And there's a really interesting human moment in the sources about a meeting during that siege. It involves a rabbi.
This is one of those anecdotes that adds so much depth to the story. During a lull in the fighting, the Israelis requested a truce to identify bodies,
Okay.
and Nasser agreed to escort an Israeli rabbi, Shlomo Goren, to the battlefield. And Nasser actually ordered his troops to stand at attention and salute the enemy dead.
A moment of respect.
A moment of soldier-to-soldier respect. He saw the prayer phylacteries on the bodies, spoke with the rabbi, and expressed respect for their courage. It's a moment of chivalry that stands in stark contrast to the bitterness that would define the relationship later.
But coming home from that war, he wasn't greeted as a victor by the state, was he?
No, the public loved the soldiers. The famous singer Kulthum even hosted a celebration for them. But the government was suspicious, and the soldiers were furious.
Why furious?
This is a crucial detail.
Yeah.
Nasser and his men felt betrayed. They believed they had been sent into battle with defective weapons.
What does that mean?
Ammunition that misfired, grenades that didn't go off. They blamed the king's corruption, claiming the palace had bought cheap, faulty weapons to pocket the difference.
That is the ultimate betrayal, sending your own soldiers to die so you can make a profit.
And whether the defective weapons scandal was entirely true or, maybe exaggerated, it became the truth for the officers.
And Nasser realized the real enemy wasn't across the border.
The real enemy was in Cairo.
So the timeline accelerates. He gets back to Cairo and starts organizing what becomes the Free Officers. And this is a pretty diverse group.
It's a big Kent conspiracy. I mean, you had communists, members of the Muslim Brotherhood, aristocrats, paupers.
A real mix.
The only thing uniting them was their hatred of the British occupation and their hatred of the monarchy.
Nasser was the mastermind, the organizer.
He was. But he was smart. He knew a lieutenant colonel was too low-ranking to command public respect as a head of state. He needed a frontman.
Enter General Mohammed Naguib.
Right. Naguib was an older, highly respected general, a war hero with the scars to prove it. The Free Officers recruited him to be the face of the coup.
They essentially hired a boss.
That's a good way to put it. And on July 23, 1952, they made their move.
The revolution. Or the coup, depending on who you ask.
It was surprisingly smooth. They seized the army headquarters, the radio stations, the telegraph offices. Within hours, they controlled Cairo. It was almost bloodless.
They called it the White Revolution.
They did.
And what about the king? King Farouk. This is the guy they've hated for years.
This was the first big test of the new leadership. Some of the officers wanted to execute him, French Revolution style.
But Nasser stepped in.
Nasser was the voice of reason here. He argued that killing the king would just create a martyr and invite foreign intervention. He pushed to exile him instead.
So King Farouk boards the royal yacht.
The Marusa. Ironically, the same yacht his grandfather had used to open the Suez Canal, and he just sailed away into the Mediterranean.
That is poetic. So 1953, the monarchy is officially abolished. Egypt is a republic. But now you have a classic problem. You have the guy on the posters, General Naguib, and you have the guy pulling the strings, Nasser. That power dynamic is a ticking time bomb.
And it exploded almost immediately. Naguib was a true believer in democracy. He wanted the army to stabilize things and then go back to the barracks.
He wanted elections, a free press.
A return to civilian rule.
Yeah.
And Nasser and his inner circle looked at that and said, absolutely not.
Why? Were they just hungry for power?
Partly, perhaps. But they also genuinely believed that if they opened up the system too soon, the old order, the corrupt feudal lords, the politicians who served the British, would just buy their way back into power.
So they needed a transitional dictatorship to cleanse the system?
That was Nasser's view, yes.
So how did Nasser win this? Naguib was the popular one.
This is where Nasser proves he's a Machiavellian genius. In 1954, Naguib tried to force the issue by resigning. He thought the people would beg him to stay.
And Nasser called his bluff.
He accepted the resignation. Then, Nasser used his control of the trade unions and the impulse of the street. He organized strikes and chaotic protests that effectively said, without the military, there will be anarchy.
He manufactured chaos to present himself as the only solution.
Exactly. He outmaneuvered Naguib, he isolated him, and eventually he placed him under house arrest. By late 1954, Nasser was the undisputed leader.
But just as he grabs the ring, just as he consolidates power, he almost loses his life.
The Manshi Incident. October 1954. This feels like a scene straight out of a movie script.
It's the moment that transforms him.
From a military dictator into a messiah almost. Nasser is delivering a speech in Alexandria to celebrate the British withdrawal treaty. It's night. The lights are on him. Thousands are watching.
And a gunman appears.
A gunman from the Muslim Brotherhood stands up in the crowd and fires 8 shots at him from close range.
8 shots. And he's a stationary target at a podium.
Glass shatters.
Yeah.
Panic erupts. People are screaming, trampling each other. But Nasser, he doesn't duck. He doesn't run. He stands there, gripping the microphone.
And then he speaks.
As the shots stop, he screams into the mic, improvised, raw emotion.
I have the quote right here. It's chilling, he shouts. My countrymen, my blood spills for you and for Egypt. I will live for your sake and die for the sake of your freedom and honor.
And then the clincher. If Gamal Abdel Nasser should die, each of you shall be Gamal Abdel Nasser.
The crowd just erupts.
From panic to hysteria, they start chanting his name. In that split second, surviving that attempt, he became untouchable. He showed he was willing to die for them.
And he did not let a good crisis go to waste, did he?
Not at all.
Oh.
He used the assassination attempt as justification for a massive, ruthless crackdown.
On the Muslim Brotherhood.
Exactly. He accused them of the plot, which was true, and arrested thousands. He set up the People's Tribunals. He executed leaders. He imprisoned their chief ideologue, Sayyid Qutb. It was the consolidation of the Mukhabarat state.
The intelligence state.
Yeah. But it wasn't just force. He was smart. He knew how to use soft power.
The arts, you mentioned Kulthum earlier.
Yes, the arts were a huge part of this.
Yeah.
He had the biggest singers in the Arab world, Kulthum, Abdel Halim Hafez, singing these epic songs that praised nationalism and the revolution. He controlled the press. He curated his image perfectly.
So he secures the home front with an iron fist. Now he looks outward. And this leads us to 1956. The Suez Canal. This is the defining moment of his career.
This is the high-stakes poker game. The context, of course, is the Cold War. Nasser wants to modernize Egypt. His dream project is the Aswan Dam.
To control the Nile, generate electricity.
Yes, and he needs it badly. The U.S. and U.K. initially offer to fund it. But Nasser's playing both sides. He buys weapons from the Soviet bloc because the West won't sell to him.
And the U.S. doesn't like that.
The U.S. Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, decides to punish him. He abruptly withdraws the funding offer for the dam. And it's a public humiliation.
So Nasser is furious.
He's on a plane returning from Yugoslavia when he finds out. And he decides to hit back where it hurts. He decides to nationalize the Suez Canal Company.
Which was owned by British and French shareholders.
And he's going to use the tolls to pay for the dam himself.
And the way he launched this is so spy novel. The code word.
De Lesseps. Ferdinand de Lesseps was the French builder of the canal. Nasser gave this big speech in Alexandria, and he told his military commanders that when he said the name de Lesseps, they were to seize the canal offices.
So he says the word.
In the middle of this long speech, he starts talking about the history of the canal. He says de Lesseps, and boom, the troops move in.
The West must have absolutely lost their minds.
It was panic. For Britain and France, this was just theft of their property. For Israel, it was a threat because Nasser blocked their shipping.
So the three of them get together.
They hatch a secret plot. The Protocol of Sèvres. It was a conspiracy.
What was the plan?
Israel would invade the Sinai. Britain and France would then issue an ultimatum to separate the combatants and land their own troops to protect the canal.
Taking it back, basically, the tripartite aggression.
Correct. And militarily, it worked. The Israelis swept through Sinai. The British and French paratroopers landed in Port Said and bombed the Egyptian Air Force. It was a military defeat for Egypt.
But we remember it as a massive victory for Nasser. Why?
Because Nasser won the political war. President Eisenhower in the U.S. was furious.
He wasn't in on the plan.
He hadn't been told. And he did not want a colonial war distracting from the Soviet crackdown in Hungary, which was happening at the same time.
So he steps in.
He threatened to crash the British bound if they didn't withdraw. He forced them out.
So Nasser emerges from the rubble, having stood up to two empires and Israel, and he's still standing.
He became the victor against imperialism. His popularity went supernova. We were talking about the high tide of Pan-Arabism.
He wasn't just the president of Egypt anymore.
No,
Yeah.
He was the leader of the Arab nation. And he had a new weapon, the transistor radio.
Voice of the Arabs.
Exactly. He built a powerful radio transmitter and beamed his speeches into every village, coffee shop, and living room, from the Atlantic to the Persian Gulf.
He could destabilize governments with just a speech.
He could. The masses listened to him, not their own kings.
And this euphoria leads to a really fascinating experiment in 1958, the United Arab Republic.
Yeah.
Two countries, Egypt and Syria, actually merging into one state.
It sounds crazy today, but the momentum was unstoppable. Syrian leaders, fearing a communist takeover in their own country, rushed to Nasser and basically begged for a union.
Was he for it?
He was hesitant. He knew it would be messy, but he agreed. He became the president of the UAR. When he visited Damascus, the crowds were so dense his car couldn't even move.
But there were enemies everywhere. There's a story about King Saud of Saudi Arabia trying to take him out during this time.
Yes, King Saud was deeply threatened by Nasser's popularity. There was a plot to shoot down Nasser's plane as he flew back to Cairo from Syria
But it was foiled.
by the Syrian security chief, Abdelhamid Sarraj, who was a diehard Nasser supporter. Nasser actually waived the bribe money given to the conspirators in front of a crowd in Damascus.
That is a flex.
A moment of absolute triumph.
The union with Syria, it didn't last.
It was a bad marriage. It collapsed in 1961. The Syrians felt like they were being colonized by Egypt.
How so?
Nasser centralized everything in Cairo. He sent his trusty hatchet man, Abdel Hakim Amr, to govern Syria. They imposed Egyptian-style land reform, which angered the elites. They imposed the police state, which angered the liberals.
And a coup ended it.
A coup in Damascus ended the union.
That must have been a bitter pill for Nasser.
It broke him. He took it personally. He felt he had lost half his nation. This is when his health really starts to decline: diabetes, heavy chain smoking. The stress was eating him alive. He became more paranoid, more insular.
Let's pause the geopolitics for a second and look at what life was like for the average Egyptian under Nasser. Because we've talked about the police state, but there was another side to the coin.
There was. And we have to be fair here. For the fellahin, the peasantry, Nasser was a hero for very tangible reasons.
He broke the feudal system.
He broke the back of it. Before Nasser, a tiny percentage of families owned almost all the arable land. Nasser passed laws limiting land ownership and redistributing the rest to the farmers.
He gave them dignity.
He gave them land, which meant dignity. He also made education free, from primary school all the way to university. He guaranteed government jobs for graduates. He built hospitals.
The Aswan Dam, the Helwan steelwork.
The social contract was clear. You give up your political freedom, and in exchange, the state will give you bread, education, and pride.
But the price of that political freedom was steep.
Very steep. The press was nationalized. Dissent was crushed. The prisons were full of political prisoners, and we have to address the uglier aspects found in the sources regarding anti-Semitism.
Right. The sources mention a 1964 interview.
Yes, in an interview with a German newspaper, Nasser publicly cast doubt on the number of Jews killed in the Holocaust. He also allowed the distribution of anti-Semitic tracts like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion.
But he claimed his fight was with Zionism, not Judaism.
He did, and he did have Jewish advisors. But these actions and statements are a matter of historical record and remain a stain on his legacy.
So we have a very complex picture here. A man building schools while denying history. Restoring dignity while taking away liberty. But everything, the reforms, the rhetoric, the charisma, it all crashes into a wall in 1967. The Six-Day War.
The Nakba.
The setback.
This is the tragedy. By May 1967, tensions were boiling. The Soviets gave Nasser a tip-off that Israel was massing troops to attack Syria.
Was that true?
No, it turned out to be baseless intelligence. But Nasser felt he had to act to maintain his credibility as the protector of the Arabs.
So he moves troops into the Sinai.
He does. Then he makes the fatal escalation. He expels the UN peacekeepers who had been there since '56, and he closes the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping.
Which Israel had explicitly said would be an act of war.
Yes, Nasser crossed a red line. Now, many historians believe he was bluffing.
He didn't really want a war.
He thought the U.S. would restrain Israel, or that he could negotiate from a position of strength. He was playing brinkmanship.
But his army. Let's go back to Emmer, the friend from the academy.
This is where loyalty over competence destroys nations. Field Marshal Emmer had turned the military into his own personal fiefdom. He promoted friends, he ignored training, and he grew wealthy.
The army looked good on paper.
It looked impressive on parade, but it was hollow. Nasser knew Emmer was a problem. He called him a state within a state. But he couldn't fire him without risking a coup.
So you have a president bluffing and a field marshal who is incompetent, facing an Israeli military that is prepared and mobilized.
And Israel did not wait to be attacked. On the morning of June 5th, 1967, they launched Operation Focus.
The airstrike.
An all-out airstrike on Egyptian airfields. The Egyptian pilots were literally at breakfast. In a matter of hours, the entire Egyptian Air Force was destroyed on the ground.
The war was lost before noon on the first day.
Effectively, yes. But the tragedy is that the Egyptian leadership didn't tell anyone. They broadcast victory marches on the radio.
While their army was being routed.
Meanwhile, Amr panicked. He completely lost his nerve. He issued a withdrawal order that was so chaotic it turned into a rout. Soldiers were retreating without cover, strafed by Israeli planes, dying of thirst in the desert.
And in 6 days, it's all over.
Egypt lost the Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip. Jordan lost the West Bank. Syria lost the Golan Heights. It was a total, absolute humiliation.
It shattered the myth.
The Lion of the Arabs had been defeated in 130 hours.
And Nasser's reaction. He goes on TV on June 9th.
This is a surreal moment. He appears on television looking broken, aged 10 years in a week. And he tells the truth, mostly. He admits the grave setback, and then he resigns.
He takes full responsibility.
He says he's handing power to Zakaria Mohidin and returning to the ranks of the ordinary citizens. He takes it all on himself.
And then the twist that no one expected.
Logic dictates that the people should be furious. They just lost their land, their sons, their army. But instead of rioting against him, they rioted for him.
Hundreds of thousands in the streets.
Pouring into the streets of Cairo in the dark, chanting, "No, no, we are your soldiers, Gamal." They refused to let him go.
Why? Is it Stockholm Syndrome? Or just pure desperation?
I think it's the fear of the void.
Yeah.
He was the father figure. They felt that without him, the country would collapse completely or the colonial powers would return.
They clung to him.
So Nasser agreed to stay. But the sources are clear. The man who stayed wasn't the same man. He was a ghost.
And what happened to Amer?
It ended in Greek tragedy. Nasser accused Amer of plotting a coup to take over after the defeat. Amer was arrested. Shortly after, it was announced he had committed suicide by swallowing poison.
Or was suicided?
Many believe he was given the choice: suicide or execution. Either way, Nasser lost his best friend and his territory in one terrible stroke.
The final years, 1967 to 1970, sound agonizing. The war of attrition.
It was a grinding, low-level artillery war along the Suez Canal. Nasser was trying to rebuild the army from scratch with Soviet help, but physically, he was dying.
Living on painkillers and cigarettes.
Working 18-hour days trying to fix the unfixable. He eventually accepted the Rogers Plan, a U.S. initiative for a ceasefire, just to buy time for the missile defense systems to be built.
And the end comes during Black September in 1970.
Yes. Civil war erupted in Jordan between King Hussein and the PLO, Arabs killing Arabs.
So Nasser throws himself into mediating it.
He called an emergency summit in Cairo. He was shouting at leaders, negotiating truces, just exhausting himself. He managed to get a ceasefire signed on September 27th.
His final act.
The very next day, September 28th, he was at the airport saying goodbye to the Emir of Kuwait. He felt dizzy. He went home, lay down, and had a massive heart attack. He died a few hours later.
He was only 52.
52. Incredibly young for a head of state.
And that brings us right back to where we started. The funeral.
The shock was total. The headline of a Lebanese newspaper summed it up perfectly. 100 million human beings. The Arabs are orphans.
And the funeral was just mass hysteria.
The coffin was on a gun carriage, but the crowds broke the cordon. They were swarming the coffin, weeping, chanting, "There is no God but Allah, and Nasser is God's beloved."
It's incredible. Even his enemies wept.
Even his enemies. Because he represented a time when the Arab world felt big, when it felt like it mattered on the world stage.
So let's try to land this plane. We've gone from the postal worker's son to the broken idol. When we assess the legacy, how do we balance the books?
Well, it really depends on what you value. If you value national dignity, independence, and social welfare, Nasser is a hero.
He ended the British occupation. He built the dam.
He educated the poor. He gave Egypt a voice. He made the Felahin feel like citizens for the first time.
But if you value democracy and human rights,
then the verdict is harsh. He institutionalized the military dictatorship that has plagued the region ever since. He destroyed political life. He created a culture of fear with the secret police.
And his foreign policy led to the loss of Sinai.
A defeat that haunts the region to this day. And the economic stagnation of the late 60s erased many of the early gains.
Yet, despite all of that, during the Arab Spring in 2011, almost 40 years after he died, people were holding up pictures of Nasser in Tahrir Square.
That's the nostalgia. They aren't missing the secret police. They're missing the sense of purpose. They're missing the idea that Egypt could lead the world.
And he wasn't personally corrupt.
Not in terms of money, no. He lived simply. He died without a fortune. In a region plagued by kleptocracy, that purity of intent, even if the results were disastrous, it still resonates.
It really is the paradox of the charismatic leader. He loved his country, but he loved it so much he felt he was the only one who could save it.
And that brings us to the provocative thought we should leave the listeners with today.
Let's hear it.
Was Nasser's charisma his greatest asset, or was it his fatal flaw? Did his sheer magnetic power blind him and the Egyptian people to the rot within the system?
Did they trust the hero so much that they stopped checking the math?
Until the Israeli Air Force was over Cairo and it was too late.
That is a heavy question. History rarely gives us clean heroes, does it?
Never. It gives us men like Nasser Colossal, complicated and tragic.
Thank you for guiding us through this massive chapter of history. It's a lot to process.
It is. Thanks for having me.
And thank you all for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.